What's up, everybody? Ryan and Greg
Hello.
here, and we are breaking down the Twilight Zone, Jordan Peele's new revival of the classic series.
Now, before we get started, again, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen the episode yet, get out of here, go watch it, and come on back. Okay, let's get started. Overall thoughts. What do you think of this episode, Ryan?
I really liked it.
Okay.
I want to start, though, with a shout out to Dan Carlin and Hardcore History. He is the voice of the podcast on the airplane, Enigmatique. And if you haven't listened to Hardcore History before, you owe it to yourself. Check it out after watching this video or save it for the next time you're on an airplane. It's awesome.
I'm Rodman Edwards, the host of Enigmatique, and I'm going to lead you through the last moments of Flight 1015.
As for the rest of the episode, I really liked it. I thought it was a very smart update to what has already been done twice in the Twilight Zone history. This time it has a little bit more cultural awareness. It goes deeper into the mental illness part of it and the paranoia.
Yes, it does.
And without presenting like an actual sort of clear and present danger, like the gremlin on the wing. I think the bird hitting the engine early in the episode is sort of like a shout to like, what if there was a real problem? And instead it goes into this like kind of loopy paranoid version.
Yeah, the gremlin was replaced with just prejudice.
Yeah, prejudice.
And anything you could think
Maybe
of.
racism there.
A little bit of that, yeah.
And also like sort of playing on like the common enemies of American paranoia. Like, you know, there's Russians, there's Muslims, there's like the kind of boogeymen that are haunting the, you know, US media and personal fears and paranoias. I thought that was really cool. And anyone can feel free to disagree. But I think we got a little kind of Fight Club going on here.
That's kind of what I liked about this episode. It's a mixed bag for me a little bit. I really enjoyed it for the most part, but that Fight Club vibe really got me like, okay, maybe this is all in his head. This is just all in his head. Joe does not exist. It's just in his head, and he's just driving himself insane on this plane.
I think the case is super strong for Joe Donner not existing.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, there's nothing that like properly supports him as a real person or character. Also, I like the introduction where it's sort of like ego feeding. He's signing a magazine, but you know, for a fan.
Also, I'm a fan of the runtime too. Had this been the same length as The Comedian, almost an hour in length, I probably would have been rolling my eyes a little bit because they would have had to continue to do the same thing over and over and over.
Right, compared to The Comedian, this is like much less complex.
Yeah.
This Nightmare at 30,000 feet, it separates itself from the other Twilight Zone versions, including just some cool touches. The ending is totally different.
Yes, it is.
The mob has their way with him, and also completely throwing out the real danger.
Yeah.
You know, that in the original versions, Guy is definitely crazy, but crazy Guy is also right.
Well, yes, you're confirmed. Your thoughts are confirmed throughout the episode. In this one, they are not. So that's where you're gonna be at the end of the episode going, all right, I gotta do my own thing here. I gotta figure this out myself. Cool. With that said, I like the ending a lot.
And incredibly, every passenger from Flight 1015 had survived, except one. None of the survivors could explain it, but Justin Sanderson was missing. His whereabouts, still to this day, unknown.
So let's go through the plot and then hit some Easter eggs after that.
Let's do it.
Okay. This episode is written by the X-Files' Glenn Morgan and Daredevil's Marco Ramirez. And I think more interesting to both of us, directed by Greg Yaitanes, who directed our favorite episode of Castle Rock last year, The Queen.
I can get lost in the past. If I find a chess piece in the icebox, well, I know it's now.
The Queen was easily the strongest episode of that series. It was all Sissy Spacek all day, where she's sort of losing her mind, getting confused about where she is in time, where she is in reality, and the strength of that episode, you can see that carry over a bit to Nightmare.
The best way to spot deceptive behavior: act like a deceptive person.
Nightmare at 30,000 Feet stars Adam Scott as Justin Sanderson, which is loosely inspired by the iconic Richard Donner directed episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet that saw William Shatner being terrified by a gremlin on the wing of his plane.
What do they call them during the war? You know, the pilots? Gremlins.
So this episode starts off right from the top with the TSA. You have the pat downs, security checks. Again, Glenn Morgan shout outs for X-Files here. Also, you brought up Glenn Morgan earlier. He did the Final Destination franchise too. So that makes a lot of sense for this episode. So we meet Justin Sanderson, who's dealing with PTSD, like in Shatner's original Nightmare episode. He meets Joe with an E, okay? And from there, I immediately thought, does Joe with an E actually exist?
Joe with an E. Thank you. Be seated. Okay.
Now, I've watched this episode 3 times now. Joe does not pay for anything. It's completely all Justin Sanderson. He's given him his autograph, but that's all we see. And then for the rest of the episode, we have Joe going around from like spot to spot on the plane, but no one really makes any contact with him. It's a little strange here. I really feel like we're looking at like a Tyler Durden thing with this character, but I'm not sure whether or not they just decided to edit it, cut it out, or it's just leave it up to you.
It definitely doesn't have to be that way, but it feels that way. Mm-hmm. Probably about halfway through is
You're thinking
where
this is where the twist is coming in.
Something is not right with these two.
Yeah.
Once it became like a little bit more like encouragement, I was thinking, okay, there's a good chance this is an imaginary person. What informs Justin's crazy ideas is the podcast.
A little MP3 player he finds on the plane.
Finds it in his seat, which he has been conveniently relocated to, and starts listening to it. The podcast is from the future, and it's telling the story of his flight.
Sure.
And in vague details because nobody really knows what happened on the plane.
Their plane would disappear from flight control radar, never to be heard from again.
So they immediately point out in the plot that he tries to give it to someone to listen to it, and they just say, I don't want to catch lice.
Don't want your ear germs or something.
I would admit, guys, you gotta listen to this. I'm sorry, but someone has to stop for a second and listen to this. This is crazy. It's gotta be a joke. Something's going on. But the second he sees the bird hit the engine, I think it's all bets off at that point. You're like, okay, now PTSD is go. So the moment that bird hits that engine, Justin's paranoia and prejudice kicks in, and this is the moment where we get like a little bit of an echo to the original Nightmare, you know, the scene where William Shatner is trying to grab the gun. He's slowly
From the
reaching
air
over-
marshal.
From the air marshal, and then this one you have like a shot where he's just reaching over the soccer players' bags to try to get in those. Okay, cool. No gun. He can't reach for a gun, obviously, and this time I was like, please don't do that. At the same time, what do you think of these cockpit cameras? that I was like, no, that's not gonna happen.
I've never seen that before, but
Hey, sure, it's cool for TV, I guess. You needed something for the ending.
To me, it's just a narrative device type of conceit. I think if we're like, I think if we're pulling on that string, we're looking too hard for something to find fault with. It's just there for, creative device, really.
Allow me to wish you all the very best for the remainder of Northern Gold Star Flight 1050.
And that's really it. It's a straightforward, simple story. He's trying to solve the mystery from the podcast. He or this other person crashes the plane. Either way, he helps it to happen.
Yes.
That's it. And I kind of like it. It's super simple. The Twilight Zone, historically, super simple stuff.
Yes.
Like, we're not, mind-bending on the Twilight Zone. We're having a little bit of fun, a little bit of paranoia, a little bit of horror. So far, with Peele's Twilight Zone, we're getting a good update. It's like these are modern versions of these stories, or modern themed, that have actual, issues snuck in there that are current.
Yeah. I would recommend to not do any more reboots or whatever. What do you want to call this? Is this a remake of the original, or would you just say they used the title? Come on. I would recommend no more remakes. Actually, let's do no more.
You think so?
Let's do no more Twilight Zone remakes. Let's just continue forward.
I think there could be some.
You can have some subtle echoes and mirroring to other episodes, but
if they're like this, where it is like legitimately modernized and it is different enough, I am down for more of them.
Okay.
Now, I would also like to know if anybody, just leave them in the comments, whether there's any Twilight Zone episodes you would like to see get this treatment that Nightmare got. Because I dig it. Let's jump into some Easter eggs, references, things that we think you need to pay attention to going forward.
Let's start off with Gold Star Airlines. We see that Sanderson's flight is operated by Northern Gold Star Airlines, a wink to the original episode that took place on a Gold Star Airways flight.
Early in the episode, when Sanderson is on the phone with his wife, he's standing by this big Mission to Mars, like, mural poster thing. And that may be a throwback to maybe a couple different Twilight Zone episodes. There's Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up? And people are like all over. I also think that the framing and photography of that moment is super intentional, and we're probably going to be looking at Mars at some point later in the series. Probably the most obvious sort of reference or Easter egg in this episode for anybody who watched the original is after the plane is crashed and there's debris everywhere, there's a shot of a little doll washing up from the surf.
It's the gremlin.
And it's the gremlin from the original Shatner episode. Under the category of things to pay attention to within the context of this series,
The Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone is the magazine rack in the airport. So one of the things we see right off the bat, if we're paying attention, is that the top row of the magazine rack has magazines with Samir from the comedian episode on the cover.
And so he's still in his prime of his career right now, just wiping people out back and forth, apparently. No spoilers for anything if you haven't seen that episode yet, but it looks like he's in the prime of his career still. And you can spot Oliver Foley, who will appear in the episode Down the Road, The Wonderkin, is featured in Dansburg magazine with the tag, "Not Kidding Around, The Unprecedented Rise of Oliver Foley."
The pilot of Flight 1015's name is Captain Donner. There are two maybe credible explanations for this. The first is a callback to the original Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, directed by Richard Donner, who directed Omen, Superman, Goonies, and Lethal Weapon. Or it could be connecting the pilot to one of the comedians in the comedian episode, whose name was also Donner.
Dan Carlin's Enigmatique podcast references a few episodes of Twilight Zone. He mentions the crash of Flight 22 out of Miami Beach. Now that is a callback to the 1961 original episode 22, where a woman at the very last moment decides not to get on her flight, which is a good idea because it explodes moments later. And Global Airlines Flight 107 out of Buffalo refers to the Season 3 episode The Arrival, where Flight 107 from Buffalo lands safely with no crew or passengers on board. Now, this is a stretch, but the lines that Joe gives about the past could be referring to the episode Odyssey on Flight 33, where they actually go back to the past for a little bit in the air.
That's a bit of a stretch.
Very much of a stretch.
But
it's there because they're gonna go, they hit almost every episode that takes place
there.
with the plane. I know.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Finally, the MP3 player that Justin finds is manufactured by Whipple. This is the very same company from the Season 5 episode of the original series, The Brain Center at Whipple's, which featured a factory owner determined to replace men with machines. Let us know down in the comments or on Twitter what your thoughts were on this episode of The Twilight Zone.
And make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we will see you all back here next week. Bye-bye.